Questions? Senator Ludlam.
Thanks for joining us. Sorry we've kept you up so late. In your last annual report, you've stated quite a bit of detail. I'll just quote back to you one of the things that made it in there. At the end of the reporting period, the AG referred an inquiry into potential reforms for national security legislation to the Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. The reform proposals are wide-ranging and, if accepted, could lead to extra responsibilities for this office to ensure that agencies continue to exercise their functions lawfully with propriety and consistent with human rights. Was your office consulted on the terms of reference provided to the Joint Committee?
No, my office wasn't consulted on the terms of reference.
Okay, thank you. Was your office asked to comment or provide any background info that was included in the discussion paper that was distinct from the TOR?
No, my office wasn't asked that.
Thanks. Have you or your office been briefed or provided with talking points or any material on the data retention side of the proposals?
We haven't been provided with talking points or material. I haven't sought briefing on that particular proposal. I have had a general briefing from ASIO about the proposals, but that hasn't been a particular focus for my office.
When did the ASIO briefing occur, and did they offer that, or did you request that?
Look, I can't recall whether it was offered or requested. I get briefed often by ASIO about matters, particularly about legislative reform and changes, so that would just be a routine matter. That particular briefing was after the committee commenced their inquiry. I can find out the date and give it to you, but it was after the committee commenced their inquiry.
And just on whose motion the briefing occurred?
That might be more difficult to ascertain. We probably just set up a regular meeting and they briefed.
And it came up?
Yes. Well, It was a meeting particular for that purpose, but we would have those sort of meetings quite frequently. All right,
thank you. In terms of the extra responsibilities, we've seen a lot of agencies in this space, particularly ASIO, take significant increases in staffing and mandates and roles and expansions of powers and so on. My understanding, as you set out in your annual report, you are under pressure. Your office has only received one additional post in the last 2 years, is my understanding, and stop me if I'm misrepresenting any of the material that you put forward. You appear to be warning the government here in your annual report that you will need extra resources if these reform proposals to the Joint Committee are adopted. Is that fair?
In the annual report, I describe our resources as adequate but limited. Okay. And I'm foreshadowing that if I didn't get additional resources, if all these proposals were implemented, I would have to further prioritise the work of my office and change the focus, and perhaps some areas would get less sampling, some areas would get less attention than I think would be desirable.
Yeah, okay. That is understated, but nonetheless, I take your point. Have you as yet conducted any inquiries or followed up any queries or complaints arising from amendments made to the Intelligence Services Legislation Amendment Act 2011? Reasonably passed the chamber.
Look, I'm just going to have to look and see what the actual changes were subsequent to that legislation.
Do you want to take that one on notice?
I will take that one on notice because I think it's difficult for us to ascertain any particular inspection what arises as a result of those amendments and what arises in the normal course of the work. So I'll take that one on notice. I've got in front of me the changes, but I will take it on notice.
Thank you, and understood. How would your office go about ensuring that ASIO's collection of intelligence on an Australian citizen overseas were in keeping with the human rights and privacy standards of your office?
Okay, there's a number of things. Firstly, the actual policies that they set up. We get consulted about the policy and I give my views to both the agency and the relevant minister about the policies in terms of, collecting information or passing information?
No, we'll start with collecting.
Collecting information and the passage of information. Secondly, I look at their files and do a file audit and review what actually happens at various posts. And thirdly, I think it's the speaking to the actual officers. For example, I briefed all of the ASIO liaison officers when they were in Canberra recently about my expectations and about how they could fulfil those expectations. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Now, I've got a question about the annual report on the TIA Act 1979, and I imagine, I don't know if this is something you know you can help us with, or if I should put this to the Attorney's Department, because I believe another iteration of that annual report is probably due any day or any week now. But ASIO, so that when we're listing a record of the agencies that surveil Australians, ASIO is not required to report. They don't have reporting obligations under the TIA Act. Do you know, and can you tell us what other agencies conduct surveillance activities on Australian citizens that don't have reporting obligations under that Act?
I think ASIO, to my knowledge, ASIO is the only agency that has exemption from that reporting regime.
Could you, again, knowing that I just kind of ambushed you with that one, could you just check and ensure and provide us with any additional info on notice?
Look, I can provide you information in terms of the agency that I oversight, and I think I'm correct on that. But I think that's more a question for the Attorney General's Department in terms of other agencies that I may not be aware of.
Okay, but to your knowledge, ASIO is the only one who spy on Australians but don't need to report under that Act. I'm interested to get your views on the fact that in that last annual report, it identifies this range of agencies pursuing serious crimes, very serious crimes, apply for around 3,000 intercept warrants per year. So that's actual live tapping, phone conversations and so on. A much smaller number of stored communications warrants. But without any warrant process at all, nearly 250,000 requests for so-called traffic data or telecommunications data, which seems so vastly disproportionate, considering that no crimes need to be pursued and no warrants need to be sought. Does your office have a standard working definition of metadata, or what that data is that is being vacuumed up by these different agencies?
Look, the figures you're talking about are related to the law enforcement agencies. And
as well as the... Oh, okay, just law enforcement.
Yes, I think if they come out of the TIA report, they don't include ASIO's data, and so I don't have any jurisdiction over those agencies at all.
We're outside your scope.
Yeah.
All right, understood. Can pursue that with the Attorney's Office. Last one's from me. From your annual report, you also indicate that a small number of errors that occurred either by ASIO or by telecommunications carriers in executing ASIO warrants, mostly with respect to telecommunications interceptions. Can you just quickly sketch for us, I don't have a page number to cite you, I'm afraid, but it was in your last annual report. Can you just sketch for us what was actually going on there and what kind of remedial actions have been taken?
I'm sorry, look, I'm going to have to scrounge around for this because I think this appears in a number of places. We're talking about warrant telecommunication activities.
Yeah.
ASIO warrants.
Yeah.
And I list in the annual report a relatively small number of cases. Most of the errors occurred with respect to TI warrants, and errors included the inclusion of already disconnected services and warrant requests put to the Attorney General.
Got it.
These are the ones we're talking about.
That's it. There's 4 dot points there,
Yes.
and then a little bit more.
Which pose the risk that the interception might occur if the numbers reallocated during the period the warrant is active. The provision of incorrect expiry dates, which means that the coverage can persist after the warrant is, ceases to be in force. Clerical mistakes, such as the transposition of digits, letters or symbols.
I've got that in front of me. Yeah. Can you just tell us what remedial action's been taken? And is that something that you get to prescribe, or is it up to the agencies to fix those loopholes?
In the majority of cases, ASIO actually reports these errors to us in the first instance.
Right.
And they usually, at the same time they report the errors to us, they notify me what remedial action they intend to take. I can then comment on that remedial action. The sort of remedial action we would look for in the first instance would be the deletion of any data that was collected that shouldn't have been collected. That would be the most important thing. We do spot checks on their systems to ensure that that has happened. In my experience, it's never occurred that it hasn't happened.
The deletion?
Yes, they delete the data. Yes, that would be the most common occurrence.
Okay. Are telcos obliged to provide information to ASIO in the absence of a certified warrant? That was one of the other issues that you discussed in your report, that on some occasions ASIO hasn't actually provided certified copies of the warrants.
Yes, the instance there was they provided a copy, but it wasn't actually certified. I'll just ask Mr Blight.
Jake Blight, Assistant Inspector General. In that situation which ASIO identified and reported to us, the warrants had been certified, but the copy of the certified warrant that had been forwarded to the carrier was a faxed copy, not the original certified copy. So there was no question in those cases as to whether an actual warrant had been created by the Attorney-General and whether the actual information had got to the carrier, but a technically properly certified copy hadn't reached the carrier because it was only a fax of the certified copy.
But